Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Coach Dylan Bellis, and today we're going to talk about why do you blow up after 20 miles in the marathon? Why does your pace all of a sudden go from this is great, I'm having such a wonderful time, my pace is perfect, it's nice and even, I feel so good, so energetic, this is the best day of my life, to all of a sudden that switch just flips, and all of a sudden you've got nothing and your mind starts crashing, your body is not responding, and you still have K to go. It hurts. It's painful. It's devastating. I've been there. I've been there a lot recently, actually. And I'm constantly learning from my mistakes, and I'm constantly trying to make those little tweaks to ensure that that doesn't happen again, or at least I go into my next marathon more prepared. And I can tell you right now that while I've not perfected the marathon. And I think that's the key here. And I don't think everyone has perfected it because we're always learning, we're always growing, we're always trying to get faster, smarter, stronger, whatever it is. So if anybody tells you that they've mastered the marathon, they're probably lying to you because I don't feel like there's such thing. And I think that is one of the beauties of running in general, but also the beauty of the marathon is that it's constant work, it's constant refinement, no matter if you're trying to set a PR or you're just trying to run your best race that day. So, in this podcast episode or the video, if you're watching this on YouTube, by the end of this, I hope to give you an idea of what's going on. Why do you fall apart after mile 20? We're going to talk about what can you do? What are the strategies that you can take during the race to potentially alter that outcome so that it doesn't happen? Or if it does happen, maybe happens a little bit later. Or even more importantly, I'm going to talk to you about preparation that you can do in training, the little steps that you can take, the little additions to your training program that you do every single week to help you and help your body become stronger, more durable, and more resilient in those crucial miles from 20 to 26. I tell you all of this now as someone who just has come off running a marathon just 2 weeks ago. I ran the Houston Marathon in 2026. I ran 2:17:44. I was very excited, very happy about the race. It's the fastest race I've run since 2022. So it's been a long 4 years for me trying to return back to this sport at the level at which I see myself. But even still, I fell apart. I hit mile 21, 22, and you can look at my paces, but they get slower and slower and slower as I go into the finish. By mile 21, I was on pace to run right under 2:16 for the marathons, right on the goal pace for the Olympic trials. And that was my goal in the day. I really wanted to give myself a shot and to go for it. And at that point, legs started cramping up, started seizing. It actually started occurring a few miles earlier than that, but you don't really see a big discrepancy on my end until about 22 miles. And then it became a very tough, challenging finish. And just like you, many people that I've coached over the years, you say, I felt really good early on. The pace felt great. I wasn't working too hard. And, my lungs felt fine even later in the race. My heart rate, it wasn't crazy. If you looked at mine, it even comes down a little bit. But my legs just completely crashed out. And that disconnect, I feel like that disconnect really matters because your breathing, it feels manageable. Your effort, it feels honest, but the pace, it just still falls apart. And another thing I wanted to highlight here is that it's not fueling alone that explains what happened. For me, I was taking 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour. It wasn't fueling for me. And for a lot of people that I know and coach and help encourage to get smarter about their fueling and to practice it both in training and in races, it's not their fueling. It's not their hydration. It's not how much salt that they took. Because a lot of runners, they do assume that they blew up because they didn't take enough. If you go back 20 years, a lot of people didn't fuel very well, but it's 2026 and we know more about fueling than ever before. And a lot of us are taking that more seriously more than ever before. So I don't believe that it's just a fueling issue. I think sometimes that can be an easy cop out. It's not just that. So for us, even like for trained runners who are taking in 60, 80, 100 grams carbohydrate an hour, the real limiter to how your body feels and holds up and how your pace progresses or regresses later in the marathon, it's usually something else. It's not energy availability. It's about force tolerance. And that's kind of a weird word that we're going to use here. It's kind of vague, but ultimately it's about force production. It's about how well your muscles can absorb the stress of running and have greater endurance and be able to produce the same amount of force, of speed, velocity, however you want to explain it late in the race. Because when you're running and you're running at a hard competitive pace, you're taking thousands and thousands of steps. Your muscles are constantly going through contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation. And if your body is not in tune to that or accustomed to that or strong enough to be able to hold that for the entire duration of your run, what's going to happen is that you're going to get some cross signaling. You're going to get some breakdown that occur, that force to become less pronounced. The signaling from your brain to your muscles, it's not as strong anymore. And the force, that the production that you get from your muscles, not as strong. And that's what happens. You end up slowing down. Oftentimes you get maybe even some misfires where you get muscle cramps, twitching. I know that this happened to me starting at about mile 17 or 18, and this has been something that has been a real problem for me over the years. But it's never forced me to stop. If you're a lucky one, it just is a brief period of twitching. But for some people, what happens is it goes into full contracts fully, and you get like those Charlie horses that you talk about, and that can cause for a lot of walking later in the race. And so a lot of this is just due to how durable can your body be later in a race? Can you withstand those forces on flat over hillier courses? Can your body absorb the eccentric pounding of a course like Boston or like New York or one of those longer downhill races that require a lot of braking forces on your body? You have to be a strong individual, not just in the gym, but through running as well. Like, you have to be prepared for that in a very specific way to then have that last over the course of the marathon. And this is something that we can train. This is something that we can work with. So this episode is going to be all about why exactly that's failing, why pacing might feed into this, and how you can train so that you get past mile 20 and you're not scared of the rest of the distance and you're starting to rope that finish line in versus feel like you're just trudging through sand and all you want to do more than anything in your life is just to get to that finish line. Okay, so moving on now, we briefly just talked about the idea of peripheral fatigue or fatigue within the muscle itself and the brain signaling to those muscles and the reduction in force or output under fatigue conditions. And a lot of us have issues. It could be calf related, it could be quad related. That's another big one for some of us who are running those hillier races. The quads really start to give out. Possibly other people, it might be hamstring and the stability aspect of it and the overall extension from our hips. And maybe some other us were experiencing issues in our glutes and more the actual hip area where you're not getting the same amount of hip extension. You're getting some loss in the overall control of your pelvis. Your stride length ends up shortening. If you've ever looked at your data, if you have a Garmin or Coros at the end of a race, mine actually shows a really good example of this, but everything dips. My heart rate dips, my cadence dips, my stride length dips, my vertical oscillation dips, everything declines. So clearly I'm fitting this bill perfectly. So no matter what it is, it doesn't matter what it is. It's usually not just one muscle quitting on you. It's not just your calves. It's not just your quads, hamstring, glutes. It's kind of everything in combination with each other. Usually it's not just isolated to one area. You might feel the pain is isolated to one area, but a lot of times there's some compensation going on, which can then make that particular area that's being fired up worse than others. But ultimately, it's the entire system losing coordination. So here's where this really starts to matter. And it's the first thing that we need to get off our chest and what we need to talk about. And that number one thing is pacing. So pacing can be a very mechanical decision. Running just slightly faster than your marathon pace doesn't just burn more fuel, it also changes how the force is applied to your body. So early on in a race, a potentially over ambitious pace that increases the things that we already talked about, increases your braking forces, increases the eccentric load that we talked about. It recruits some of those more fatigue prone fibers earlier in the race. And then ultimately, that's going to accelerate neuromuscular fatigue because you're out there for a marathon. It's a long time. And if you're slightly working above your threshold, eventually that's all going to come crashing down. You might feel fine aerobically, but you're spending that durability that you'll be needing later. So this is why I really encourage people to make sure that they're sticking to their race plan, to make sure that they're doing what their training has shown that they can do, and maybe even being a little bit more patient at the beginning of a race because you really want to have more later. A lot of people try to maybe bank some time, maybe take advantage of good vibes. But what happens is that your muscles, when they start to fatigue and when they start to crash, they crash hard and they just basically stop working for you. I know a lot of people who've gone on way too hard, maybe even PR through halfway, and then they find themselves walking in a very miserable, terrible experience that I don't recommend to anybody racing a marathon. So that damage, it's occurring. It's occurring very quietly, but when it shows and when it presents itself, it shows itself drastically. And this is why a lot of runners say, I felt really good. I felt amazing early on. I was great through halfway. And then it just all unraveled. That's not just, it's not bad luck. A lot of people might think that, it was just this bad luck thing that happened, but it's putting yourself in debt via pacing. So that's the first thing that we really have to stress here is making sure that you're pacing yourself appropriately. Now, every marathon is going to be a little bit different, but on an ideal day, ideal course, good situation, you should be aiming for slight negative splits or at least an even or as close to even splits as possible. It's not an easy thing to do, and it takes a lot of trust in yourself, and you got to know yourself as well. It's hard to, and this doesn't work every single time. You might have not realized that you were overambitious and this happened. You might have to make those changes on the go. You might notice that the pace is a little too hard early on. You have to scale it back. But knowing your paces, knowing the appropriate effort, knowing maybe even heart rate data that's related to your marathon pace is all very important. You need to be able to triangulate these three things to produce the best race on the day because you can't just go with the flow all the time. You can't just take advantage of what the race gives you because a lot of times it spits it right back at you and you end up running a lot slower. So I like to tell people that, hey, if you're 5 seconds under pace, you might find yourself 15 or 20 seconds over pace during those later sessions and often or sections of the marathon. And often it's even worse than that. A lot of people end up putting minutes on minutes on minutes on their final time because they went out too hard. They went out too aggressively in the first 5 or 10K. I'm going to use myself as an example here because I like to admit my own mistakes and I know where I went wrong. I went out in 107.49 for the half marathon in Houston. I was on pace to, of course, run 2:15:40 at that stage, ran 2:17:44. I looked at my earlier splits. I had a couple 504, 505, 508 miles in there. And realistically, I was training from closer to 510 to 513 per mile. And I think even those 5 seconds, I think that put on an additional 10 or 15 seconds in those final couple of miles. So while I'll admit I probably wasn't going to run sub 216 on the day, and maybe I should have adjusted my race plan earlier on, I do think that with a better approached plan, a smarter first 10K or 10 miles of the race, I believe I could have saved a little bit of time. Maybe that would have been just a couple of seconds. Maybe it could have been up to a minute. It's hard to exactly say, but I know why my body was going through such a crisis later on. It was because I was over ambitious, that I was not respectful to the actual fatigue that I was putting on my legs over that time. So it's a hard thing to know, but pacing is number one. That is why we crash after 20 miles in the race. Now we're going to go more onto this because that's just one thing, right? Pacing is one thing. We're going to have to talk about the training and how we can adjust the training for that. Let's briefly talk about nutrition because fueling itself is not going to save you when your muscles just completely go out. There's that classic marathon thinking that you hit the wall because your glycogen hits zero, that you run out of glycogen. And the reality is that your glycogen rarely hits zero and that most of us living has probably never actually experienced having glycogen of zero. I don't think your brain will actually let you do that. But what happens instead is that you have less glycogen available in your damaged muscle fibers from going out a little too hard. Those type 2A fibers, your intermediate fibers, as well as your fast twitch muscle fibers that start to get recruited when you get fatigued. They start to fatigue a lot earlier as well. And then the overall cost, per unit, I guess, also rises due to the recruitment of other muscle fibers. So even if you are fueling well, your muscles can't use that fuel efficiently anymore. And that's why runners still implode, even if they're feeling incredibly well. Even if you got an A++ on the day right there, it's also another reason why. So fuel does support your performance, and it's so important for the marathon. It's so important for your training, but ultimately it's durability that we have to talk about here. Now, what about elite athletes? So elite athletes, they also deal with this, but they just deal with it a little bit differently. Elites don't just avoid fatigue. They might look good and smooth, and you might have seen a professional runner run by you in a marathon on the other side of the road, and they just look like they're flying, that they're gliding through the air. They look like gazelles. It's awesome. But they still do experience fatigue in the same way. It's often more delayed in elite athletes. They still experience quad damage, calf damage, neuromuscular issues. I mean, all sorts of problems. Like, a lot of elites do experience this. And unfortunately, at the pro level, a lot of athletes do end up dropping out because, again, that pacing issue. But they do enter the race slightly different than most of us. They have a higher degree of being able to have a higher degree of force capacity. They have better economy than us under fatigue. They have a higher tolerance to eccentric loading because they're doing so much training. These are primed individuals who are spending their life running 12, 15, 16 hours a week. They're training specifically for this, but they've been doing it their entire life. So when they do decay over the course of a race, it still happens. It just happens a little bit slower. And that's why you can look at an elite and you'll see that they did slow down the last half of the race or the last 6 miles or however long of time period you want to put it. But it's generally less a percentage than the rest of the race. You might see 5 seconds or 10 seconds where in 3 or 4 hour marathoners, you might see 20 or 30 or possibly even over a minute. So they are a lot better at avoiding, or I guess not avoiding fatigue. They're a lot better at being durable, a lot better at delaying that fatigue and how much. And that's mostly just due to the amount of training that they're doing and the type of training. So this now transitions us into training. How can we actually fix this problem? So if it's not nutrition, or I guess, it could be true nutrition, it could be pacing. Those are two things that we know. We can easily point at that. But what actually fixes this issue of dying after 20 miles in the race? One thing that I like to stress upon anybody that I'm coaching for the marathon, it's doing specific work within the long run. It's kind of a no-brainer, but it wasn't long ago when a lot of people were just doing long, easy runs. And there was the thought that, oh, if I just run 20 miles on the weekend, that's going to help me run my marathon. But there's a big difference here. Yes, like, you need to be able to build up your muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, everything to be able to withstand the distance and to be able to take the time on feet. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that whatsoever. But if your plan is to race the marathon at the fastest that you possibly can run it, you need to practice running some marathon pace, maybe even a little bit faster within the long run itself. I tell people this, that the long run after a certain point is not specific to the marathon. A long, slow, easy long run, that's not related to you going and doing a long, fast marathon pace run. Those are two different things. They have two different roles. Sure, there's some crossover, but it's not specific to the distance. So to prepare yourself for the marathon, you've got to get closer to the demands. You got to simulate more of what you're going to expect. And this doesn't mean you need to go and run 20 miles at marathon pace in training. That's probably not a good idea. But what it does mean is that you need to train this force production under fatigue. This means that you need to practice things like fast finish runs. Maybe the last 3, 4, 5, 6 miles of your long run are progressively from a little slower than marathon pace to maybe a little bit faster. I like to regularly throw these types of runs in for certain individuals. We'll do like 3 miles hard at the end. And sometimes that's even faster than marathon pace. Sometimes it's closer to half marathon pace. You need to practice doing longer stretches of marathon pace work within the long run. At the beginning of a buildup, this can be shorter reps, 1 or 2 miles with a lot of recovery in between. But by the end, we were working up to 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 miles worth of marathon pace work, whether that's all in one go or that's kind of split up in the midst of an 18, 20, 22, 24 mile run for some individual. And then another thing that we can also do is just continue to progressively introduce different ways to add fatigue. For me, I like to throw in a lot of fartlek based sessions for people as well. So it's not just marathon pace. I like to throw a little faster, a little slower, maybe some alternations in there as well, just to kind of get not just your slow twitch muscle fibers involved, but start to dig a little deeper to get more of the fiber pool involved so that we can practice fatiguing them a little bit and asking them to come into play when it's later in the race as well. Because as we get tired and our slow twitch muscle fibers start to fatigue, we are going to recruit more of our intermediate and fast twitch muscle fibers. So it's good for us to train that in our long runs for the marathon itself too. And that's going to make a big difference too for when you do get tired. You've trained for this point, you've trained under this type of fatigue, and you can hopefully avoid that happening on marathon race day. Another thing that we can do is we can start to build in some eccentric exposure as well. So if your race has a lot of downhills or perhaps even just little mild rolling terrain, you got to train that as well. So this can include things like doing downhill strides. That helps. Hillier long runs. So nice, steady, easier, I'd say steady. So like not marathon pace, but not completely easy, but just nice, hard, kind of grindy long run over hillier terrain. That's a really good way to specifically train the muscular demand of the up and down. You got to do that. And also, we can practice this type of work in the gym by doing some eccentric related training as well. I think I would put more into the running side of things, but it's definitely good to do the work in the gym. So to make sure that you're not overdoing it on the running and then causing some breakdown from just killing hills too much. This is not going to completely protect you, of course, but it's going to delay some of the issues that you find. I do think that the stronger that you can become on ups and downs and being able to manage that eccentric load, the better you're going to be for those types of races. It's a bad idea if you're someone who is training for Boston or New York to be running completely flat every single day. So make sure that we're training on some of the terrain that we're expecting to train on. You can, of course, still do marathon pace runs, threshold runs, interval runs, everything you want on those types of conditions and courses as well. But to be more specific, we're talking downhill strides, hilly long runs, eccentric strength work. Those are the big ones. Now, what else can we do? I think another option is to train running economy. So things like strides, especially when you're tired. So we can throw these into the end of maybe a medium long run or the end of itself where you throw in some pickups. I did talk about some fartlek sessions, but one way that I like to introduce maybe some of this economy work under fatigue in a long run is to throw in 10 by minute on, minute off at the very end of the run. Or maybe even that can be as short as 15 seconds, just really fast, but shorter reps at the end of a run just to get some extra recruitment in the system. Now, strides tend to be more like 10 to 30 seconds in length. So that's what we're talking about in terms of strides. I kind of extended up to about a minute, and that would be more closer to 5K pace. This also fits in line with the next thing, and that's doing things like surges. That's the same thing. If we go for a big long run and maybe we don't want to do anything too heavy or, we don't want to do too much heavy lifting that day. We're not looking at throwing big chunks of marathon pace or threshold work, but we do want to try and get some engagement and to surprise the system in a way. So we can throw some 30, 45, 60-second surges in there. Maybe we say, okay, after 10 miles, every time you see an uphill, I want you to run up it hard for 30 seconds and then make sure that you have at least 5 or 10 minutes of easy running in between. It's a really good way to practice that type of economy work under fatigue. We can also think of things like short hill sprints. I think they're great. I also think doing drills are also going to be really helpful for someone who's trying to improve mechanics, speed under fatigue, but also just trying to run with better mechanics, to run more efficiently, to run more economically so that breakdown doesn't occur at the same rate that it did before. I think strides, hill sprints, surges, drills, this is the thing that I see that's often avoided most in non-elite individuals. A lot of people just don't make time for it. So what I would do is I would try to carve out time in your day or in your training. If maybe I prescribe it, maybe another coach prescribes it, to do this type of work, because it seems so pointless. It seems so short. You think to yourself, how is 15 seconds at faster than mile pace? How is that going to help me run faster in the marathon? And it's that it's going to improve your economy when you're tired. If you can raise your ceiling, at which your muscles are firing, you can take in more oxygen and use that better when you're tired. That's going to help you even in a marathon. So don't skip your strides. Make sure you're doing the little things if you have time. Also incorporating things like drills are great for you as well. I really think that solving the issue of blowing up after mile 20 is something that we can work with. All right, so those are the main items that I really wanted to talk about today when it comes to blowing up after mile 20 in the marathon. We talked about fueling, we talked about pacing, we talked about strength training, we talked about making sure that we're adjusting our training in a way and things that we can do to help offset some of these issues that we run into. And I say all this, but I also want you to understand that we're going to make mistakes. We are constantly learning and improving. We're getting faster or better, smarter, stronger, whatever it is. One thing doesn't apply to the next. So the best thing doesn't always apply to the next. So the best thing that I recommend that you do is just make sure that you are incorporating some of these things into your training. Make sure that you're doing the work so that you give yourself the best chance of succeeding on race day. And you never know how things are going to unfold, how things are going to go. Sometimes the race is out of your control. Sometimes you don't have the ability to understand why something happened. But if you can think critically about everything that you can possibly add in your training, and you can put that all together in an intelligent manner and then approach race day in an intelligent manner, then you can then give yourself the best chance of succeeding at the marathon. So my recommendation for you is, next time, or if you're coming off of a marathon that you had blown up, you need to ask yourself, was my nutrition on point? And in today's episode, we're talking about most people, it's not. I mean, most people, it's fine. Did I pace myself well? That's a big one. That's probably the most important piece here, is pacing. Number two, did I train for this? Did I do long runs with specific marathon work in them? Did I train my body to be engaged when I was tired? Did I do all those little things, on my day to day that would help me succeed, to help get other muscle fibers involved? Did I do strength training? Did I do the type of strength training that's going to be best helpful for running? Whether that's eccentric work or possibly even some isometric work to get more engagement time, more time under tension. And then lastly, did I do the little things? Did I do my strides? Did I do my plyometrics? Did I do my hill sprints? Did I do my surges? Go through this list of things, and that's how I feel like you can better serve yourself to be successful after mile 20. That's all I have for today. Thanks everyone for listening once again. I'm Coach Dylan Bellis, and I will talk to you next time.